Great, thanks. Let's pray, shall we? Father God, for the opportunity of being here today, be with us this afternoon as we look at the legal structure of our freedoms here in Canada and the challenges that we are facing. I ask and pray, Father, for your Spirit to be with us, give us clarity of thought, and may, Father, when we leave here, have a rich understanding of what you have called us to do is our prayer. Amen. Okay, so so one of the things I need to do is I need to knock that down. I'm having a little bit of reverb there. We all set? Okay, testing. They're getting it figured out. Well, it's great to be with you again this afternoon as we talk about the legal revolution against religious accommodation in Canada. I'm going to be expanding this a wee bit more. By the way, that's my pond at my house. I see that...
Where's the grapes?
The grapes? Oh well. What happened there? But anyhow, I don't even know if I could get back there. Yeah, it's just on the side of the hill. All right, here we go. Let's see how this works. All right. I'm sorry? There you go. Yeah. Okay, so I've gone through a fairly interesting journey over the last couple of years since the beginning of COVID. I worked for an evangelical organization for 10 years as head of their legal department, and had a wonderful time working there and dealing with the whole issue of charities in Canada, Christian charities. And it was increasingly evident to me as time went on during the COVID experience that the government was gaining more and more power, and I was not at all excited about how things were developing, especially during the 2021 election when government started taking a very negative policy towards those who were not vaccinated. And it was kind of like an us and them were created. And so I have, over the years, done a lot of writing for op-ed like National Post and Epoch Times and so on, and also for various legal journals. And as time got on, I found myself becoming more and more critical of what was happening. And in particular, the whole issue of conscience is something that has been a lifelong part of my career, standing for conscience, representing people in various courts. I've been at the Supreme Court of Canada, 5 different arguments, 5 different cases. And it seemed to me that we were living in a time that was surreal, where there was this pressure coming more and more against a relatively, they were known as part of the fringe minority or the ones with the unacceptable views and all the rest of it, but it was... It just seemed to me that I could not stay where I was in order to be more vocal on the issues. And so ultimately I decided to resign my position and started up a foundation, First Freedoms Foundation, wherein we advocate for freedom of speech, freedom of religion and conscience, and inviolability of the person. And a lot of people say, well, what does inviolability of the person mean? And I'll talk about that a wee little bit, but basically what it is that the state does not have the right to do what it wants with my body, right? You know, that's, okay, so I got a very enthusiastic response there. But yeah, so that's always been the case. I mean, you have that basic human respect that was always understood in our law. And that was being violated. And I decided that I could no longer be silent, and so I began doing a podcast and began interviewing people, lawyers, politicians, university professors, activists, talking about these issues. And then a friend of mine said to me, Barry, he said, you need to write. You need to write on these issues. And then, of course, I had no idea that the convoy thing was going to start when I started First Freedoms Foundation, but then suddenly that became all the news. And so I went up. I went up to Ottawa. I was up there for 3 full days over 2 weekends, and just to talk to the truckers, talk to the people, try to find out what's happening, why are you here, all that kind of thing. And so I basically vlogged everything. I videotaped all my conversations, and a friend of mine who was helping me with my website said, Barry, the best thing to use is your little GoPro, and go up, and when you're interviewing, just record everything. And so I did. And it turned out to be a godsend in many ways. I did not go up there with the intentions of writing a book. I just went up there to just find out what's happening and why are people upset. And I mean, I knew why they're upset, but like, how is this all going to unfold? And what became evident to me was right away was how what I saw as I was walking along the road, speaking to the people, was very different from what was being reported in all of the mainstream media. Like, it just was like 2 different worlds. Like, where was this coming from? And so that then really got me going because I started saying, okay, well, no, there's something bigger going on here, and I needed to just kind of dig into this, like, what's happening? I mean, already we knew things were not right with the whole COVID experience. I had, on the one hand, I had friends of mine who I greatly respected and admired, who were members of the medical profession, and who were telling me that whatever is happening in the public health system right now in Canada with forcing everyone to be vaccinated, or at least, creating the pressure with the politics of everything and all the rest, and then doing all these lockdowns, trying to prevent the spread of an airborne virus, was like, no, that doesn't even make sense. That's not part of how we were trained when we went to medical school. Now, I didn't go to medical school, but I was listening to my physician friends who were telling me, like, this is crazy. And so I'm like, okay, so on one hand, I'm hearing from that, but on the other hand, I'm hearing from this, and it was like such a confusing time of trying to make sense of it all, and I'm just literally trying to make sense of what's happening. And then the animosity that was going on between the politicians against the vaccinated and unvaccinated, and it just was a mess. It was a very confusing time. And then the truckers came, and it was like, people have had enough. And so that, all of that was kind of like playing in my mind when I went to Ottawa. And so literally started really digging into things more. And so I was writing on it on my blog, I was doing podcasts, I was doing all of that. And then a friend of mine says, hey, Barry, you need to write a book on it. And I hadn't really thought of writing a book on it. I've always been doing writing. I've always been doing op-ed pieces. I've been doing legal academic work where I would write for various law journals and did 4 or 5 academic books on freedom of religion and law and religion and that kind of stuff. And I have never really written for the general public. I've always written for people who you automatically assume they understand everything you're talking about. And so my wife would always say to me, and still will say to me, Barry, your writing is so boring. I can't believe that anybody would read what you write. And she says, all you do is you're just talking to a bunch of law professors and lawyers. And she says, how many do you think are reading your academic work? Probably what, 10, 15 people? And so so then when this project came up, she was like, yeah, okay, well, this makes sense because now you're talking to people like me, people who are not educated in the law, people who are, just trying to understand what on earth is going on. And so it was a different mind frame for me, right? So on the one hand, I was the guy who suggested to me, I need to write very simple and just allow it so that everybody understands what the issues are and so forth. And so I said, okay. So then I started writing that. And let me tell you, it is very different because now I'm constantly having to second guess myself. Well, when I use this term, will the reader understand that term? Like, you go through law school and you learn all of the legal jargon and also, the Latin phrases, and all of this kind of stuff. And when you're immersed in all of that, like I have clients who come to my office now and we ask them to read their will before we sign it, right? So they had already come in, and so we're now going to sign the will, and then they will say to me, well, I understand a little bit of it, but I don't understand the other part, in the will. And if you've had a will done, there's a lot of legal jargon in a will. And so it was, it's that kind of thing. So when you're living it day after day, and then when you're now wanting to write it so that my wife will understand it, she hates it when I say, well, so, you mean I need to dumb it down? She said, no, I'm not dumb. It's, so anyhow, we had a wonderful experience with that whole thing. So when I'm writing, I'm writing for someone as if they have no idea what the legal language is, what it means. So I've tried more than anything I've ever written to write in a way so that when you pick it up, and you don't have a law degree, you can nevertheless understand why it was such, for example, on Tamara Leach, who I understand had spoken here at this church some time ago, like, why was that so offensive? Like, you just kind of instinctively know there was something going on, but why legally was it so offensive? And so I've got a whole section on that, for example, explaining the whole bail system, how it works and how it should work and how it didn't work for her and all that kind of thing. And so that's kind of what happened. And so anyhow, all of that to say that I said, okay, so how can I do this? How should I approach it? And so the friend who suggested, Barry, I should write it, he said, you got to have a number in it. You got to have a number. Now, he's a marketing kind of character. And he says, I don't know. He said, Barry, 20 ways for the truckers or something like this. And so I tried to get to 20, but the problem was already you can see about 16 brought. 16 ways the truckers ignited Canada for the long haul. I used to call it first 16 ways the truckers saved Canada, but ultimately I changed that, and then it was 16 ways the truckers ignited Canada for the long haul. And I was going to do 20. In fact, I could have done 40 or 50, but you only have a limited amount of time in life and everything else, and it's kind of like what Churchill says, after a while. Let me just read you what Churchill said, because I quoted it here. And it's one of those things that I think is so right on when it comes to what goes on here. Let me just see. I think I got it here somewhere. Anyhow, the idea is that it's when you're writing a book, he says it's an amusement. And then after a while, it becomes a mistress. Then after a while, it becomes a tyrant. And just when you're about to give yourself over entirely to the monster, you slay it and you fling it to the public. And that's kind of like how it was with me. So eventually I got to the place where I had to fling it to the public. Anyhow, so that's it there. And so I encourage you to, if you have a chance to, obviously, to get a copy. I'll work with the pastor here. Maybe we can do a bulk order so you can save on shipping and that kind of thing. Make it a bit cheaper with respect to that. Okay, now let's go on with this idea of the legal revolution against religious accommodation in Canada. When we think of religious freedom in this country, we are indeed living in a country that is a wonderful country, has a great history, despite all that we hear about now, about how horrible our history was and all the rest. But really, when you think about it, we have a lot to be proud of what we've accomplished. Yes, there have been mistakes made in our history. We know about them. We're being reminded about it every day. But nevertheless, there's an awful lot of people that want to come to this country every year. Currently, right now, we're looking at somewhere around 1 million people a year are wanting to come to Canada and to be part of this country because it has a lot of things to offer people. And one, of course, has been our freedom. And in particular, the whole concept of religious freedom is one that this country has had a lot of. I'm using some slides right now, by the way, right here. My friend, Professor Bruce Pardy, who gave the Diefenbaker lecture that our First Freedoms Foundation organized. I've kind of taken from his lecture some of his slides that he was so gracious to give to me, and we're in the process of putting his lecture as well in a format. It's already online. You can find it on our website. But anyhow, I thought this was very good what he had put together, and I think it's important for us to just understand how the law works in a big picture. So prior to the modern era, we had the sovereign, right? The sovereign, the king, or queen, depending on the circumstance. But nevertheless, the king, the sovereign, is from whence came our law as far as the actual laws on the books of a country. And so we saw this, of course, with Great Britain and all of its colonies. We all understood that it goes, there's always been this idea. King comes up with some idea, brings it to the legislature. The legislature is going to debate it and decide whether or not there's going to be laws and so forth. But the legislature kind of acted as a bit of a go-between between the king, the sovereign, and us, the people. And of course, back in the day, the king was so sovereign that whatever he or she said became law, regardless of what the legislature. But as time moved on, we kind of had this idea, this principle. And then from the legislature, seems like we got an extra E there, but anyhow, from the legislature creates the law, and then the courts now are going to interpret the law. So the courts are going to say, okay, this is the law, but the activity of the king or the king's men or women, the enforcers of the law, have violated the law, and so they end up going into court, or there's mutual people like you and I, we're fighting against each other because of property, because of money, because of whatever. We go to court, and then the court makes a decision based on the law. And then the whole idea was, of course, that there's a rule of law versus a rule of persons. Because the problem with having a king make all the laws is that the king can do whatever he like at a whim. Like in one of the great examples in history is that of King Henry VIII. Obviously, he had a lot of whims that was made law. And one of the ones he had at one point was that no one was to have a Bible. But William Tyndale decided that, well, he's going to translate the Bible so that every English citizen would be able to have their own copy of the Bible. But then the king was persuaded that, well, we are not going to have that, and so therefore we're going to persecute William Tyndale. And Tyndale flees over to the Netherlands. He's eventually caught, and there he's burned at the stake. And then only a little while later, the king decided, well, you know what? This is such a great thing, having a Bible. Let's put the Bible through all of the kingdom. And it's like, one day the king is this, another day the king is that, but whatever the king says, it's the law. Right? So this concept of being ruled by law made a lot more sense versus ruled by persons, i.e. the king or the oligarchs and all the rest. So then we had this idea that there's going to be a separation of power. You're going to have the executive, the king. You're going to have the legislature as another power. And then you're going to have the courts. So we got these three heads of power. Separation of powers, that law applies equally to everyone, including those who govern, including the king, is going to be subject to the law. And so these rules, these laws would be fixed and announced beforehand so that people would know whether or not they're going to be violating the law. And so basically this is kind of how it looked. We have the state. And we got a legislature. We got the administration, which comes out of the executive. So that would be like, for example, the federal bureaucrats or the bureaucrats in the provinces and so forth. And then you got the courts. So we still got the three heads of government. Well, as time goes on, we get a constitution. Now, a constitution is interesting because the Constitution now starts laying out rules and frameworks of the king, the legislature, and the courts. And it is the highest law of the land. And so the king is not the highest law of the land, the Constitution is. And so Canada has become, over time, we are a constitutional monarchy, right? So our monarch is subject to our Constitution. Now, the problem is, in Canada, unlike the United States has one document called the U.S. Constitution, right? And it's a fairly small document when you think of it. Well, the Canadian Constitution, you see, we like to have things complicated. So we don't have one document. We have multiple documents. Last count is around 24. And you say, well, Barry, how in the world do we get so many documents to be part of our Constitution? And who can make sense of it all? Well, so this is the conundrum, I guess, we find ourselves in the law here in this country. But, for example, we have the British North America Act, which is now known as the Constitution Act 1867. That is the act that was passed by the UK Parliament after the negotiations that went on with John A. Macdonald and all the various representatives of what was then British North America. And so we got that document, which some people would say, well, a lot of people would think, well, okay, so that is the Canadian Constitution. Well, no, that's just one part of the Canadian Constitution, big important part, but nevertheless, it's only one. But then in 1982, we had the passing of a Constitution Act, 1982. They come up with these great names that's so practical, right? So Constitution Act 1982, and that act is what gave us the Charter of Rights. And that, too, is a constitutional document, one of the 24. And then when Newfoundland took over Canada, when Newfoundland joined Canada, I'm glad to see you got that joke. But in 1949, there was terms of union that were passed, which allowed Newfoundland to become part of Canada. And that is part of the Constitution, the part of whenever a new province came in and so forth. That becomes part of the Constitution. But it is even more complicated than just having multiple documents. We also have unwritten constitutional principles. And where in the world did they come from? Well, they come from judges who look at our various documents, constitutional documents, and they come up with their own principles that Not everyone have seen it before, but now we see it because we, the judges, say that these exist. And so, for example, and I'll mention some of this later, but one of those would be this idea of charter values. Charter values is not anywhere in the Constitution, but it's deemed to be a constitutional doctrine of interpretation. And it is a very interesting concept, and I'll just try to outline it here real quick. But the way it works is this. The Charter has an aura, an essence, an ambiance. And part of this aura is the idea that everyone is equal. And so because everyone is equal, equality becomes part of the Charter value. And the Charter value is something that we want to encourage because it's in line with the general ambiance of the Charter. So, for example, and we'll talk about this case that happened not too far from here, and that is the Trinity University Law School case. So, the idea here is that if in this case, the university decides to have as part of its regulations of admission to come into the university that you have to accept the idea that marriage is one man and one woman, then says the courts, that kind of goes against the ambiance or the Charter value of equality, because we've moved beyond that traditional understanding. And so therefore, what is fascinating is that the Charter value, even though it's not in the Constitution, becomes part of the discussion of the judges and the courts to actually limit what a particular litigant, i.e. Trinity Western University, can do. And that's kind of how it plays out. So what I find so obnoxious about the Charter value concept is that in the grand scheme of the idea of protecting the Charter values, you're actually taking away Charter rights, freedom of religion, which is just like, it's mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling the way that works. Then we got constitutional conventions. There is absolutely nothing in the Charter that says anything about the office of Prime Minister. It doesn't exist. If you were to look and read the constitutional documents, you would think that Canada was run by the monarch. But Canada is not run by the monarch. Canada is run by the Prime Minister. But it's nowhere found in our Constitution. You cannot find the term Prime Minister in our Constitution. So how does that happen? Well, it's a convention. It's a constitutional convention. We just, through tradition, this is just how it has evolved. And which is fascinating. You know, in the United States, you've got, the president is all listed out as to what his or her powers are and all of that. And in Canada, we don't have any listing of the powers or anything in our Constitution of the Prime Minister. Nor do we have anything about, for example, the whole concept of how parties operate and work and those kinds of things. They become conventions, and they are just traditions, as it were. Okay? So it can be complicated, and it is part of the reason why a lot of people say to me during the whole COVID experience, like, Barry, why isn't it that the Charter hasn't protected our rights, with the whole COVID experience? And this is part of the reason. Part of the reason has to deal with this complexity of our rights. And we'll go through and have a look at this now. Okay. So the Canadian Charter. The Canadian Charter is one of the 24 constitutional documents that create our Constitution. And it's become a very important one in which the If you go into law school, in fact, I think you could go through law school and almost have the idea that the world really began in 1982. That's when we got the law. Well, no, the law's been around for a long time. And so we've got the idea here. The charter is kind of the buffer, as it were, between it's the vertical relationship between the government at top and us as citizens at the bottom. So if the government in operating violates our charter rights, there is to be a protection there. Government is responsible not to offend the charter. Okay, so notice what happens. Here we have words from the charter itself. Whereas Canada is founded upon the principles that recognize supremacy of God and the rule of law. Now what's interesting, I point out to people, supremacy of God, in the opinion of the Supreme Court of Canada, has no meaning, has no legal meaning. The rule of law, of course, does have a legal meaning, but there's a real big debate within the legal community as to what on earth is meant by the supremacy of God. It didn't just fall out of the air. It was put there by the legislators, and it was put there with a history. We've had, John Diefenbaker had the Canadian Bill of Rights, which is not a constitutional document. It is simply a piece of legislation, but he also had in his Bill of Rights this concept of supremacy of God. Anyhow, we could do lectures on that and still be all day kind of thing. Okay, so here's how it works. So you've got the charter, and the very first section of the charter automatically limits the rights that are coming, okay? Because here's what it says. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject to only such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So, again, let's unpack it a little bit so you understand. So you're given the rights, or your rights have been recognized. I prefer that language rather than you being given the rights by government, because government doesn't give us rights. It recognizes our rights. This is a point that I think a lot of people today miss, because we don't get freedom of religion from the government. We get freedom of religion by virtue of being human beings. Okay. So, but you have these rights, but they can be limited if the limit is what? Reasonable. As can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So, first of all, we need to know what reasonable is. We also need to know that it's prescribed by law and that it's going to be justified, demonstrably justified to whom? The courts. So the courts get to decide what's reasonable and what isn't reasonable. And that's where we really start getting, the rubber meeting the road. So, okay. So the very first right that's recognized here, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion. Now, Pierre Trudeau put in conscience because he wanted it to be considered the idea of the non-religious who have a personal opposition to whatever are also given rights. Now, what's fascinating is that the courts haven't really spent a whole lot of time digging into what does conscience mean legally. And when they have, the one or two courts that have, they basically see it as more or less a kind of a scion or a part of the religion kind of opposition. So it's quite fascinating to see how that is happening. Just recently, in fact, as of yesterday, I guess, I co-edited a book that was published by LexisNexis in Canada, dealing with the issue of conscience and the charter and the rights. But again, it's just an open up. Okay, so now what is religious freedom? In 1985, in the province of Alberta, there was, at the time, there was the Lord's Day Alliance, the Lord's Day Act was passed since the 1800s, and it was being challenged in Alberta by a drugstore called Big M Drug Mart. They wanted to open up on Sundays. And so the question is whether or not that violated freedom of religion to have the stores closed on Sundays. And so under this particular act, ultimately the Supreme Court said yes, it did. And then this was the first case that tried to interpret what religion means in the Constitution, in the Charter. So let me just read this to you. The essence of the concept of freedom of religion is the right to entertain such religious beliefs as a person chooses, the right to declare religious beliefs openly and without fear or of hindrance or reprisal, and the right to manifest religious belief by worship and practice or by teaching and dissemination. But the concept, he says, means more than that. That an emphasis on individual conscience and individual judgment lies at the heart of our political tradition. Now, let me ask you, is this a good definition of freedom of religion? How many of you would agree? The right to entertain such religious beliefs as you choose, the right to declare religious beliefs openly without fear of hindrance or reprisal, the right to manifest your religious belief by worship and practice, by teaching and dissemination. What do you think? Sounds good, doesn't it? I think it's a fantastic definition of religious freedom, to be honest with you. As time has gone on, we're now starting to see that this kind of open language on freedom of religion, see, this is back in 1985. The charter came in 1982, so it's kind of like early days. But now we're seeing the courts tighten that up substantially. Okay, interesting here as well, he says that the emphasis on individual conscience and individual judgment lies at the heart of our democratic political tradition. Think about that for what we've experienced over the last couple of years. So this was down in 1985, but would you say that that people were paying attention to this idea over the last few years dealing with the whole COVID experience? Not at all. Okay. So the ability of each citizen to make free and informed decisions is the absolute prerequisite for the legitimacy, acceptability, and efficacy of our system of self-government. It is because of the centrality of the rights associated with freedom of individual conscience, both to basic beliefs about human worth and dignity and to a free and democratic political system, that American jurisprudence emphasized the primacy or firstness of the First Amendment. It is this same centrality that, in my view, underlies their designation in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms as fundamental. I mean, Dixon, man, he was just getting right into it. Like, this is a great thing. This concept of the freedom of the conscience, freedom of the individual, it lies at the very basis of our democratic institutions. I mean, this is exciting. He said they are the sine qua non, the very essence of the political tradition underlying the Charter. Wow. All I can say is wow. I mean, if only we could continue on with the 1985 definition of religious freedom, as just as Brian Dixon gave us. But alas, we have become more complicated than that, And we've ended up now with, because we advance, of course, in our understanding of these kinds of things. All right, so that's the vertical relationship. The vertical relationship is between, is that the Charter buffers the relationship between the government, the Prime Minister, and us as citizens. But now what about between you and I? And freedom of religion has a horizontal relationship. Now, theoretically, as I took this picture at the courthouse in Toronto, whether you're the lion or whether you're the lamb, you're equal before the law, right? And for sure, the lion wouldn't want to eat the lamb. Okay. It's a horizontal relationship between you and I as far as human rights are concerned. So, for example, in providing services to the public, it must be open to everyone. You can't just say, I'm going to offer an apartment for rent, but Newfoundlanders are not allowed to rent my apartment, right? That's unacceptable. That's discrimination. But yet, here's another interesting thing. Here's the paradox. In order to have religious freedom, you've got to have discrimination. How do I mean that? Well, just think about it. If you are to hire a pastor for your church, your pastor is going to have to fulfill various definitions for your church. For example, they would have to be members of your congregation or members of your denomination. And so people who apply for a position as a pastor, you would want to ensure that they're going to be ministering to you as a member of the religious community. And so that requires discrimination, okay? So what's interesting about human rights legislation is that on the one hand, it prevents people from discriminating, but on the other hand, it allows discrimination, because that's the only way that religious freedom would be able to work. So what's fascinating in a lot of the literature right now is that people talk about freedom of religion and they say, well, really all we're doing today, and this is where things begin to change, you're really talking about the right to discriminate. And that's part of the legal revolution that I'll be talking about. So, for example, you see in the province of Ontario, there's no discrimination if the religious organization is primarily engaged in serving the interests of the same religiously identified persons, and so on. And the same thing in Ontario. Clergy can refuse to perform a marriage that's going to be against their religious views, and that's okay. And you also don't have to provide them with the use of the facility and that kind of stuff. Okay. Allowed sacred place there. Okay. Income Tax Act. The Income Tax Act also has been amended as a result of the marriage redefinition to shield religious charities from tax penalties due to exercising their religious freedom on the issue of same-sex marriage. So we got that done. This is like about 20 years ago, this kind of thing happened when marriage was redefined in 2004 by the courts and then by the legislature in 2005. Okay, but there's other exemptions. We kind of had this idea that we would allow religious communities to be able to operate having freedom. And so we get kind of like added on benefits as a result of being a religious community. For example, you get consumption or sales tax on religious literature, that's exempt. Property tax for churches is exempt. You got school activities are permitted for religious observance. You don't have to pay entertainment tax. People who are opposed to have their photographs taken for when they want to get their gun license, that's Now, you don't need to have your photographs taken. Even in prisons, prisoners today can say, look, I don't eat certain foods because of my religion. Therefore, they're exempt from, they're able to be treated. But that still doesn't mean that there's not going to be any kind of conflicts, and increasingly so today. Back in 1953, Justice Ivan Rand points out, he says, a religious incident reverberates from one end of this country to the other. There is nothing to which the body politic of the Dominion is more sensitive. And that has been the nature of religion, so that when there have been disputes going on with respect to religion, it tends to be very, very emotional and very politically charged. And so, we see it around the world in other countries as well, but we've also experienced it here in Canada, where when you start attacking religion and you start attacking, people take this personally, right? Because it's my religion you're attacking. Okay. Now, we've had the idea that if you're part of the religious community, here in this free and democratic society, we will accommodate as much as we possibly can. And so we get all of these accommodations. We also get charitable status, right? So you can give charitable receipts for donations. That's not has anything to do with a freedom of religion issue, because that is just simply a perk that has been given to the religious community by the government. It's very helpful. Same thing with the property tax. I mean, if you're having to pay property tax here, I don't know how much it would be for businesses, but I expect it'd be a lot of money. Probably you wouldn't be able to afford even having the building. And so that kind of thing is something that's been extra, but it's been part of a societal understanding of the importance of religion. Religion has been assumed to be a good. And that's why, for example, you would have religions getting all of these various benefits. But now what happens when society doesn't hold the view that religion is a good? What if now society sees religion as something that's discriminatory, that has caused a lot of pain, that has caused a lot of abuse, that is really something that is from a bygone era, where we need now to question everything and to free society from the shackles of religion? What happens now? And this is where I think we are. So we see some challenges. We see challenges that if you are a religious person and you're a marriage commissioner, you're not a member of the clergy, but instead you are a marriage commissioner, you're not going to be able to say, I'm sorry, but I can't perform this marriage. You have to perform the marriage. Trinity Western Law School, government actors, you have to accept people so that you don't have any kind of obligation, even though it's a private religious school. You must still have change your admissions policies if you want to have a law school and so forth. We're now starting to hear arguments about registered charitable status, about whether or not we should be allowing, this is an open discussion that's going on in academic fields today, where people are arguing that we shouldn't allow religious communities who are discriminatory to have charitable status, nor should we allow them to have property tax status. This should be changed. We saw this in the Canada Summer Jobs issue back in 2018, where the government was giving money to church camps to hire students for the summer in the local, for camps up, out in the country and so forth. And the government said that if you are going to if you're going to have, as a faith body, your view on issues like marriage, on abortion, and so forth, if these are unacceptable to government, then you don't qualify to have money for students to be hired in the summer at your institution because your institution itself is discriminating against people. And so that became a big, major issue. And is still ongoing because the government now, it used to require on the application that you had to check the box to say that you agree with the government's view on abortion, marriage, and all these other issues. And now what they've done is they've taken that off the application on the front, but then when a church applies for that kind of funding, they are then investigated. The government actually has its staff investigating that religious community to find out what their beliefs are as to whether or not they should receive funding for their summer camps. So then we also get a number of media articles right now, and what we have seen over the last number of years, we've seen it with the COVID, but we've seen it even prior to that, with issues like Jody Wilson-Raybould here in BC, who was fired, who was a minister of justice and so on, kicked out of the cabinet and ultimately the caucus. But what we see is that government is always has a particular policy, and it wants to foment discussion in the mainstream media like CBC and so on, and getting various people to write articles. And for example, just recently in the last couple of weeks, we now have seen that the government paid hundreds of millions. I think it was a lot of money anyhow. I'm going to say maybe hundreds of millions might be over-exaggerating, but it was close on to the millions that they were paying so-called social influencers to carry on with their propaganda with respect to the COVID experience and the COVID narrative. So we know that this goes on. So when I see CBC, for example, being upset and angry because a teacher here in the province of British Columbia lost her job teaching at a Christian school because she had a relationship outside of a heterosexual marriage, I began wondering and questioning, okay, so who's, what's going on here? Are they trying to prepare the public for further changes to take away the various rights of religious organizations to be able to discriminate, to have and to hire people who are in accordance with their faith and those kinds of things. So these are the kinds of things that's going on. As I mentioned, the marriage commissioners, I got some cases there that's been happening. And what I find fascinating is that in this one particular case, the Dykeman case down in Newfoundland, so she was an Anglican lady who refused to perform marriages that were against her religious faith. And so it goes to the court, and then the court does something that you usually don't see, but is becoming more and more common, and that is, so you're standing up for your right for religious freedom, and you go to court, and then the court awards costs against you. Now what that means is that it costs you money to hire a lawyer to go to court for you, but then when you lose the case, the court says, well, now you've got to pay the costs of the government in defending, in going against you for your argument on religious freedom. That is becoming more and more common. And what it is, in my view, is just simply the courts have been saying, look, we don't want to be bothered with anybody claiming any claims of religious freedom issues, because if you do come and we disagree with you, you're going to have to pay the other side's lawyer's fees, costs, and so on. And it's like, really? Like, I mean, but that's, like, this would never happen 20 years ago. I can tell you that right now. There's no way that would have happened. But it is happening today, and we're seeing it more and more. I mentioned to you about the TWU case, and it was interesting when I was at the Supreme Court on that one. What was fascinating was the government actor, which was the Law Society of British Columbia, was saying that Trinity cannot be a law school because it was going against charter values, and we talked about that already. And so how far do you take that principle is the question. Do you take it to property tax? Because you have a particular view on marriage here in this church, should you lose your charitable status for property, for your charitable status, and for your property tax? Like, I mean, where does this go? And that's the kinds of things we're faced with. Okay. So while I was there, Malcolm Rowe, who's a justice on the Supreme Court. I was sitting like around right here somewhere, and Susan Ursel was a wonderful lawyer, great person, but she was standing up for the Canadian Bar Association's position that accrediting TWU's law school would amount to government actors condoning discrimination. And so Justice Rowe says, well, how about my theoretical Jesuit institute? You can't get in unless you're a Jesuit. You can't become a Jesuit unless you're a Catholic priest. You can't become a Catholic priest unless you're a man. Should their tax-exempt status be struck down because of that? And it's not the case before us, the Canadian Bar Association lawyer replied. But is it not the logic of what you're putting to us, Justice Rowe asked. Then she said this, she says, it is the logic of what I am putting to you. There are limits to what the state should be called upon to support. So now think about this. The argument is that because you got charitable status, therefore, the government is somehow deemed to be supporting you because you've got charitable status. So in other words, your religious views. But how does that even make sense? Because you've got many different religious groups. So are we then to say that government is supporting the Muslims, the Sikhs, the Hindus, all of the Christians of their various denominations? But anyhow, she says there are limits to what the state should be called upon to support. You are right. We are at that threshold, and we can't look back from it. So those are the kinds of things we are thinking about. Charitable status. So when you think about charitable status, we got relief of poverty, advancement of education, advancement of religion, and other things that are of basically a benefit to the community. So now charitable status in the minds of a lot of thinkers here in this country is really up for grabs when it comes to the Trinity Western case. And in my view, this case has laid the groundwork for activists to demand that religious charities holding to traditional marriage should be deregistered. That all religious charities that require a lifestyle agreement of their employees, or in the case of schools, from their students as well, are potential targets for activists to pressure government to remove their charitable status. We've already seen, for example, the Canadian Coalition, was it a Canadian Abortion Coalition, something to that effect, has been making arguments to government to take away the charitable status of pregnancy centers, those who are helping young pregnant women to be able to get, things like food and diapers and all the rest of it. My wife used to volunteer at a pregnancy center. So, there's a lot of good work being done. And so at the Law Society here in British Columbia during this whole argument on the Trinity Western case, they said, look, this really comes down to a situation where if we were to allow you, Trinity Western, to have a law school, then this is the same kind of thing as what happened at the Bob Jones University case down in the United States, where they were discriminating based on religion. And so we just simply can't allow that. So we hope that Trinity, by us going against Trinity, Trinity might do the same with its condemnation of same-sex relationships. In other words, Bob Jones changed their views on race policy. Maybe as a result of you being denied your law school, you will change your program when it comes to your admission policies. Peter Rogers, lawyer for the Nova Scotia Barristers Society, said that part of the rationale of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society not to accept TWU students was that by refusing them, they would hopefully compel TWU to change its policies. Well, guess what? It wasn't long afterwards that what happened was that the school ultimately did change the policy, but then when they changed the policy, the argument in the press then was, by the various law professors and representatives, was that, hey, you haven't gone far enough. Yeah, okay, so now you've done that, taken away the policy with respect to the students, but what about the teachers and the faculty and the staff? No, it's not enough. It's not enough until there's absolute capitulation, and that's kind of where we're at. So the idea here is that societies, if they were to agree with Trinity Western, they would be seen to be endorsing a traditional moral view of marriage. And so the court, in its decision, kind of ignored that element, but nevertheless, in my view, the net effect of the court's decision is now in a situation where religious communities are faced with an existential threat because they hold views on marriage that differ from the government actors, the social elites, and the Supreme Court. So, do religious organizations with traditional moral views and practices on marriage no longer have the support of public regulators? The religious organizations that operate elementary schools, high schools, radio stations, refugee programs, literature distribution charities, international development programs, churches, and more, all require government regulation in one form or another. Are they now considered degrading and disrespectful, which is the language that the Supreme Court used on Trinity, that the law is willing to eliminate their enumerated rights in favor of what the dissent called the idiosyncrasies of the judicial mind, which are the charter values. And so these are a situation where we're now at a point. Okay, so the challenge to religious communities then, the legal revolution, is this, is that when religious communities maintain traditional moral beliefs and practices, those with progressive views take offense that their views are not universally accepted. Individuals' confirmation bias is strengthened because we are now in a sense of an intense tribalism where it's incompatible with open-mindedness, the search for truth, because changing your mind or merely acknowledging this nuance or the religious view is somehow a form of treason or whatever you might want to call it. So as time is going on, we're seeing that people are more concerned about whether or not they're offended by the religious communities because of their religious positions. And so that, and in fact, that was used throughout, and there's a whole bunch of stuff here to go on. But so, the former Surrey Christian school teacher urges province to quash discriminatory contracts. This now is becoming a common theme. She said that what I've learned is that these policies are actually enforced, and they're enforced against people that have been longtime teachers who are respected, and it's very hurtful. I hope it changes. We see it in the COVID experience with Air Canada and all of the just have no interest whatsoever. They had people fill out applications for religious exemptions for the vaccine. They had no intention of giving any kind of accommodation. Okay. Sorry?
They had the forms, but
They did it as to think that there was an opportunity, but there wasn't, in essence. Okay, so we got government, human rights tribunals, courts, media, universities, they're all on the same page. Religious freedom claim had to be a communal claim, not an individual claim, which was incredible to me. What does your religious community say? Zero tolerance for any kind of deviation from government narrative. Government money, of course, depended upon all of these agencies to follow their line. So, here's where we are in the revolution as far as I see it, is this. Remember, we had, before it was the king, the legislature, the courts. The state now is legislature, administration, which is the executive power, and then the courts. So legislature is supposed to make rules, implement and enforce the rules, apply the rules. But watch what happens here now. More and more, the legislature is delegating authority to the bureaucrats, and the courts, in turn, are deferring the authority to the bureaucrats. So, you challenge how the bureaucrats treated you, you go to the courts, and the courts rule in favor of the bureaucrats, which is what happened with Trinity Western, is that the courts said, hey, it's the Law Society, they're the experts, and so we will defer to them. And so administration now, the bureaucrats in our state, and again, I want to give credit to Professor Bruce Pardy for this outline because I think it's spot on. The discretion to decide the public good is now made by the bureaucrats. You think it's the legislature. You think it's your member of parliament. You think it's your representative that's going to be doing it. No, it's the bureaucrats. Because the legislature delegates to the bureaucrats. Courts say, yeah, the bureaucrats are the experts. They're the ones. And so more and more power is given to the bureaucrats. So we get what we call an unholy trinity of the administrative estate. And so that's just kind of how we are. So really, the state now, and this is again Bruce Pardy's illustration of which I've borrowed, and we've got the legislature, executive, and courts, but we now have also the bureaucrats, which has made life a lot more complicated. And instead of rule of law, we are now ruled by law that's made by the bureaucrats. So the old reality was we had three branches of government: the executive, the king, which is now really the prime minister. The prime minister is actually, in my view, acting the role of the monarch. Remember, a German philosopher, political philosopher, said, "He who is sovereign who decides the exemption or the exception." And so it's the prime minister. The bureaucracy implements, obviously, what they want in the prime minister's office, legislative, parliament, House of Commons, Senate, then you got the judiciary. Laws were passed by legislative branch, executive enforces the law, the judiciary interprets the executive action in light of the law. That's the old reality. But the new reality today looks a lot like this: that the executive develops policy regardless of law, because they full well recognize that, and I know that this is probably it is a controversial statement to make, but in my view, and I outline it here in the book, for example, that I find it curious that when the government imposed the Emergencies Act, the government did not give us a copy of the legal argument that was given to the Prime Minister that from his lawyers that said that he had the authority to impose the act. I think every Canadian should have an opportunity to see that document. That has not been released, and under this current government, I don't think it'll ever be released. I hope the next government will release it because I think we should see it. And because what my suspicion is, and again, it's just my suspicion because I don't know anyone up there, but my suspicion is that the government developed a policy and they were willfully blind as to what the effect of it would be as far as law is concerned, but they just simply wanted to put a plausible argument, not a convincing argument, but a plausible argument as to why they could impose the Emergencies Act. And they went with it. And that now I've had some discussions with some lawyers recently on my podcast, and they said, well, no, I think they probably, the lawyers probably said that the government didn't have authority and that's why it hasn't been released. I kind of think I take the opposite view. Anyhow, but what we see now is that the bureaucracy, the administrative estate, implements government policy working around the law. That's how I've described it. And the legislature delegates more and more authority to the administrative estate, which is basically giving it back to the executive. And the judiciary defers to the administrative state due to their expertise or special knowledge. They are the authority. And so we recognize that. So, future limits on freedom. As we look around us today, we think of world war, I think is a real possibility. We get this concept of the globalist mindset with respect to no borders mentality. I think that's ultimately, that project is failing. I think it will fail. It has to fail. It just can't continue for a whole bunch of reasons. We can go into those. But tribal instincts, I think, ultimately prevail. That's what we see in society throughout history. It always has. I think it always will. I think we're seeing more and more technology as it advances. It creates a very dystopian future that I think is something that, you think of 1984 novel by Orwell with the telescreen. Remember that little telescreen that was watching Winston? I mean, that's just child's play to what we see developing. We're constantly being watched. We now know as a result of Edward Snowden's work that all of this is being recorded through our phones, so great to, just to let them know that we know that they're listening. I mean, it's just a reality, right? I mean, it just is. We know, for example, Snowden was dealing with all kinds of people who would be watching people in their own privacy of their computer because they had their computer on and, watching through the camera. And it's insane what's going on. We think of what's going on with robotic technology today. The mindset, the interaction, the transhumanism that's also developing. Elon Musk with his Neuralink. We think of artificial general intelligence that's coming down the pike. And literally, when I say coming down the pike, I mean, we're talking months. We're talking not a long time. We're talking, we're talking just 1 or 2 years kind of thing, where basically mankind is trying to create God. They're trying to live forever and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a huge bunch of issues that are on the horizon. I mentioned about the fourth turning earlier today. We're in a situation where every 80 years, called a saeculum, basically what happens is we have 4 generations where, so if you look at the last time period would be just after, so World War II. So that right after World War II, the 1950s would be known as the high. Everyone was trying to get back. People attending church after World War II was huge in this country. But then you're now getting that attacked. So by the 1960s, you got the whole drug culture, the sexual revolution, and all the rest. Then you go into the unraveling time frame where people are dissing institutions, dissing government, and all the rest of it. Even all that has been understood as what it meant to be human is now being questioned like crazy. And now, according to these authors, we are in the 4th turning, where things are going to happen. And as I mentioned to you before, previous 4th turnings, World War II, Civil War, the American Revolution, and as Neil Howe points out, we are now in the 4th turning. He says that the 4th turning began with the collapse of the financial collapse in 2008, and he's saying, hey, we're right in the midst of it right now, and how this is going to turn out, who knows? He has a very optimistic view because he says things will be changed very differently. Yes, there will be many, many people that will end up losing their lives because of the conflict, and an internal conflict, an external conflict, which is what happens with world wars and all the rest of it. And we see it. We see it happening right before us. We think of artificial general intelligence. It might resemble a human mind in its generality, but ultimately AGI's true nature would be a warped simulacrum. Lacking a human body and brain or normal life experiences, its mind would be utterly alien. AGI would be a half-blind demiurge, deformed and indifferent to its creator, a dark aeon of the human imagination, armed with lightning-fast processing, endless data mining, near infinite memory. It would refashion our material world according to its own rapidly evolving programs. And as the AGI altered and improved its own code, it would soon become totally inconceivable to human brains, leaving us at the mercy of the machine. That's the kind of thing we are, the kinds of things we're looking forward to. We're looking forward to a very strange time as we prepare for what is coming upon the earth. There is no question in my mind, there is a revolution not only against religion, but against humanity itself at the end of the day. So, as they would say in the religious community where I grew up, they would say, here endeth the lesson. And open to any questions that you might have. Okay, yes.
Hang on. Well, just to start with, coming up when we have our next general election, what do you think? Pierre Poilievre, he's talking, oh, I'm so wonderful and you're going to get this and that restored, whatever, your freedom, big about that. Do you really think that if he gets in, things will change in a better direction, or will it still just be same old, same old? Because is he the executive that you refer to there?
Yeah.
And his cabinet. Mm-hmm. They have to, if fortunately by some means they would get a great majority, even if they don't, if they're the government. Do you think of him with the pressures around in the world that there will be change, or same old, same old?
Well, I think there's already change in it, and there's change in the sense, for example, the truckers have created tremendous amount of change. This is one of the things that I point out is that the fact that the citizens rose up the way they did, it was nonviolent, so it was credible. If the truckers rose up and it was violent and smashed like crazy, I think it would have delegitimized it in the eyes of many, many people. Other groups can smash and, destroy and burn and all of that kind of stuff, but the mainstream media have no problem with that because they're on the right side. This group was on the wrong side, and so had they done something that was akin to that, they would have been hammered even worse than what they were. The thing is that politicians are politicians, and they will always be like water. They'll go where least resistance is. So as long as there's an acceptance of doing change and just simply wanting to, I just got distracted. Let me take that out of the way. As long as they think it's going to be politically feasible for them to make change, the change will happen. I think there will be some changes, but to what extent, we don't know. But I think at what I am of the view, we can't put our trust in politicians. We can't put our trust in any particular party, any particular whatever. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to having a great understanding of who we are as individuals, who we are as members of a family, as members of a church, who we are as far as our faith perspective, our understanding of the world. And I think we have got to recognize that it doesn't matter who's in, everybody must be held to the same standard. So that even though we may like what a new leader brings us, that still should not close our mind from ensuring that that new leader follows what's right. In other words, that there must be still a strong moral compass that everybody must follow. There's no question that change is going to be important and can be very fruitful, and it could slow down things tremendously. People are getting frustrated. Like already, governments, I think even this current government recognizes that if they were to impose the same kind of lockdowns and the same kind of policies with respect to vaccine mandates and all of that kind of stuff, there would be just even more opposition, not less. And so already we've seen some change with respect to that. So I don't know if that helps, but it's just an idea that in my mind, yes, it'll be great to have someone take back. But here's what happens a lot of times. So what happens is authoritarianism takes like 10 steps, and then there's a pushback, and then the government comes back maybe 2 steps, but it's still advanced 8 steps, and they don't go back to, and the reason why I say that is because just think about what happened with 9/11. 9/11 came, and every country they possibly could decided to pass emergency legislation. Have they walked it back? No. We're still in a situation where we can be taken to secret courts. We're also in a situation where now we know that government can label somebody as a terrorist and their bank accounts are frozen. Have we seen any legislation that says, okay, this is unacceptable? Have we seen any? No, I haven't seen much with respect to that. So it's an ongoing, there's an Irish politician I think it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, said that the price that we pay for freedom or for liberty is eternal vigilance. And that's really the reality of it. So it doesn't matter who's in. We should never just be relaxed because someone promises to do whatever. We should still maintain a strong vigilance to ensure that our rights are protected.
But you have to have the vigilant in the government.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
That hasn't happened.
Sorry?
That has not happened.
With respect to...
The vigilant are not in the government.
Yeah, but the vigilance is required on us as citizens. Like, we are to be vigilant, holding government accountable, ultimately.
Well, that hasn't happened.
I think it has happened in the sense that there is a lot less tolerance. However, I will agree with you on this point. If I have a choice of having my peaceful living and have my job and have my house and not ruffle the waters too much, so I would lose that. In that sense, I agree with you. In the sense that there is a real weight, a pressure on citizens to just keep calm, don't worry about it, and that is real, and I agree with you on that. There is a natural inclination to do nothing. And so in that sense, it hasn't happened.
That's what I see around me. The people that I talk to, the people in my strata do nothing, do nothing.
Yeah, no. And it's very few people. I mean, when you look back at history, very few people that are willing to buck the trend. There's no question about it. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Peter, your hand up?
Yeah. I got a mic here. Hey, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, very informative. So my belief or my understanding from the deep dives that I've done, the medical system is corrupt, the legal system is corrupt, the media is corrupt. And we're at a point right now where, I mean, with this lady, with what you're saying there, the average person, because the media, ultimately, and the political system is corrupt, we're ultimately at a point right now where people have no idea what's really going on unless they get their news from independent places, because all the news is filtered, it's all agenda driven, it's got nothing, there's no truth in it, it's whatever the narrative is that they want you to know, that's what they're going to jump on. And climate change, which is a bunch of BS, that is happening right now as far as in the media, you see it all the time, they're referring everything to climate change, it's not real as far as what they're talking about. So we have the political system right here that is, I believe half the House right now is WEF oriented, World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab and all that. And because, and this is just going to be happening more and more in the coming days and weeks, and everything that the UN agenda, Agenda 2030, that whole thing is coming down the pipeline. What do we as citizens do? I mean, how do we need to be organized. We need to, but getting that social cohesion happening so that we can actually do something. There are independent, Laura Lynn, Rebel News, they do a great job. Dre from Rebel's awesome. Tanya Gall, Action from Canada. These are all little independent, with a lot of traction. But there has to be so much more done. And we have a juggernaut of just absolute garbage being pushed our way.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, listen, you're preaching to the converted here, because there is no question corruption runs deep in a lot of agencies, and it basically comes down to the fact that it's run by human beings. And unless we are willing to push back, things are not going to happen. So the question is, what do we do? And on page 286 of the book, I point out one of my favorite authors is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And he, of course, was a dissident under the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union. And so on 286, 287, I outlined some things that basically based on what he said, okay? Say that we refuse to say that which we do not think. We refuse to write, sign, or print a single phrase that distorts the truth. That we refuse to utter a phrase in private or in public that is a lie. Refuse to use any creative art or scientific endeavor that depicts or broadcasts a false idea. Refuse to cite out of context a quotation to please someone or further his interest if he doesn't share completely the idea quoted. Refuse to raise a hand to vote for that which we do not sincerely agree. Refuse to be forced to attend a meeting to which we are called upon to distort a matter. Refuse to subscribe to any media outlet that distorts or conceals primary facts. Refuse to do anything or allow to be done to us anything that we know or suspect to be a lie. That is ultimately up to us as individuals, and that can be costly. A lot of people have, when I was up in Ottawa and speaking to some of the truckers, one guy was telling me how all he had left was the truck. He lost his house, right? People have paid a lot for just not living a lie. And I think that's how we do. That's what we do. So that if we are part of any organization, whether it's from the municipality or whether it's on some of these various boards, community boards, and that means we all should be involved. We should be involved in our society and ensure that we don't live a lie as we sit on those boards, as we're involved but we have responsibility. Every one of us, we influence hundreds and hundreds of people in our lives.
So you're saying get involved.
Get involved, absolutely. We have to. We have to. And even in our own lives now, we're already, like I say, we're involved in all kinds of stuff. Many of you are probably involved here on the board or on the church or in the school or wherever, right? But whatever we do, we don't live a lie. Be true, absolutely true, even when it hurts. And I think that's the principle.
Peter, you want to follow up?
Thank you. That was good. Good answer. Solzhenitsyn, I believe that's also Jordan Peterson's favorite author as well.
Yeah.
Which is top notch. Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult thing. Again, just disseminating information and getting, like you mentioned, the people in your strata, right? They don't know. They have no idea what's really going on, and so many people don't. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. David?
I've got one really quick.
Okay, go ahead, Will, then Davis.
So I don't know if you've been following what's happening in Alberta. We've had the religious issues there. You probably saw.
With the burning of the churches, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the arrest of pastors and things like
Yes.
that. We've also had Premier Daniel Smith, who's been basically volleying attacks at Ottawa on constitutional grounds over resources and things like that. So I was just wondering what you see legally if there's any potential in this sort of jurisdictional way of doing battle for Canada, in the religious realm, though.
Well, when it comes to jurisdiction, the way the Constitution is set up, the way the Charter and everything is set up, the issue on human rights, so that's the horizontal relationship between you and I, that is generally a provincial issue, although there is a human rights legislation federally in federally regulated industries. But otherwise, all of the provinces have their own human rights legislation. But vis-a-vis the Charter, all governments are responsible to ensure that they are not unreasonably limiting rights that can't be demonstrably justified, right? That's the phrase. And so it's up to the courts, and this is the struggle we're having. The struggle we're having is we're now living in an administrative state where the courts have deferred to the players, the government players, an immense amount of authority, deferring to what they say. As long as you bring it to your mind, as long as you bring the Charter to your mind, whatever decision you make, we'll accept, because you're the experts. And that's a problem. So I don't see there's going to be anything on the jurisdictional issues, on the rights matter. But I do think what's happening is that even on the other issues, so the non-religious issues, courts are still, how would I describe this?
Acquiescing?
They're acquiescing to what I would call the progressive views of resource developments, all that kind of stuff. That is a reality. But it's kind of like the same kind of mindset that's been going on with the rights issue is also boiling over in the other issues as well, as far as how the Constitution is interpreted. At least that's my observation at this point. There are, like, for example, a few years ago, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the federal government's use of the carbon tax. Carbon tax is a provincial jurisdiction. It shouldn't be a federal issue, but it is. And the Supreme Court agreed that it's okay for you to do that. And it's like, well, no, that's not how the BNA Act is organized. But anyhow, but it's the same idea, right? It's because it's a progressive policy for climate change. The Supreme Court ruled climate change is real, right? So once it's real, that's it, then it's okay.
Just no plastic straws. Or the other one they
So
sided
anyhow,
with.
so that's the kind of things we're.
Will, you want to follow up?
Yeah.
Okay, Davis, you're next.
Yeah, I really believe we're living in the end times after 9/11 and now with COVID. 9/11 really set the stage because you could be labeled a terrorist, and then boom, your rights are taken away. And growing up, I remember in high school they teach you in law that there's this time that you should have time to go to see the court. Like there shouldn't be this delay of justice, And I have a situation with my son in the hospital, and I'm presumed guilty until the court. I'm presumed guilty, so my rights are taken away. So this facade of a court and justice, because the first day we went to court, I had the paperwork to show their allegations are false. But for some reason, it's pushed from April all the way till January. So our court's gonna be 8 months down the line from when it started. And so this facade of, even I called the police, I told the police, things are happening. The hospital is actually abusing my child. The doctors, they're doing Munchausen by proxy. You know, they're actually purposely keeping him sick so that he can't come out. And MCFD, they want to put him in foster care. They said that, oh, he needs to be caught up to, he needs to get caught up with the vaccinations. So that's why we're going to vaccinate him so that we can put him in foster care. And so, you know, like this facade, even like police, I called them like, you guys are supposed to serve and protect. But they're like, oh, sorry, you know, doctors are the highest. They can't be doing that, you know. So when you talked about legislature and like, you know, they say, oh, the professionals. Because even one of my friends, I went to see him and he's like, Bonnie Henry, whatever they say, these are the experts. I didn't spend 10 years in school studying all this, you know, like they know the best, and how can they be lying to us, you know? So like when a lot of people become disconnected and then they start to say, okay, the professionals, and then like, who are we? We're dum-dums, you know, we don't know anything. But then a crime is happening. As citizens, what can we do to, you know, get justice or get vindication?
That's a very good question. And it's one that needs a lot of thought, because what can we do? Well, first of all, we know that while there's power in the individual, for example, part of the problem is that when you do go to court and you fight on various issues, if the courts are going to be awarding costs against you, which is what I've been observing lately, for people who are trying to protect their rights, that's expensive. A number of nurses in Ontario, for example, have been gone to court. One lady who I know had over $200 and some odd thousand awarded against her for costs. So that's a lot of money. And so how can individuals do this? And it's only because people who are concerned about what's going on are willing to help individuals to fight back. And so that requires a community. But here's what's happening now as well. And so part of the struggle is, for example, even with my organization, First Freedoms Foundation, what we found is prior to the government freezing bank accounts, we were receiving money to keep our foundation going. Soon as government started freezing bank accounts, nobody wanted to donate to us because they were afraid that the money that they donated to us, because we were supporting, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so on, that then can be traced by government, and they did not want to be. So what ended up happening, we had a number of people who would give us cash. And but that's all dropped off. Like, so what's happened is that, are we willing to support people like yourself or others who are struggling with injustices? And it may mean that if you're on the wrong side of, like, for example, with the truckers, there's an extreme example. But one lady who owns a cafe up in Ottawa donated, I don't know, a couple $100 to the convoy. And then when somehow the list of people that were giving to the truckers ended up becoming public. And then media, particularly CBC and others, they then started looking at the list and said, oh, this person here owns a cafe in Ottawa. So let's start doing a program about her. Why did she do this, et cetera, et cetera. Then next thing you know, a whole hate-on comes, and she had to shut down her business. So now I understand she's back up again now, but still, the point of the matter is that people don't want to go through that, right? And but we have to have a recognition that we have to be willing to pay the price. We have to be willing to support people who are facing injustice. And when courts award costs against others who are trying to stand up for their rights, that we all need to pitch in. And so that's the bare bones of it. But, you know, so we've got issues in this country.
Like, I admire the work of religious freedom, fighting for it. And I watched the documentary Plandemic 3, and it just talks about, you know, how communism, this tyranny, because we know America is the lamb with two horns, but then it will speak like a dragon, and persecution will come. It's inevitable, but we need to stand up for it. So, like, there's been documentaries recently. One was called Take Care of Maya. It's about a mother whose child was sick. The doctors didn't believe the mother. The doctors separated the mother and the daughter. And then later on, the mother committed suicide. And this documentary, I think it's been like 5 years, the court case, but they were just awarded, the Maya was awarded with the father and the brother $220 million US in America. So like, as Christians, like, is it wise for me to go to court and say, oh, this is my these are the charter rights, they've discriminated me because I have not vaccinated, you know, we haven't been vaccinated, my child, my girls aren't vaccinated. Like, they've really discriminated us, and they really just bullied us, basically, at the hospital.
Yeah, well, first of all, you're going to have to get legal counsel on that. I mean, I have my views on things, but all I can say is that right now, the courts are deferring to the administration, to the administrators, to the bureaucrats. It's happening over and over and over again. And so the only way you can, or the only way that a litigant can have any kind of comfort in taking on the administrative state is that they have to have deep pockets, which means you got to have a lot of support behind you, because otherwise, when you are, if you lose the case and then you have to pay costs on top of losing the case, it's devastating. I mean, that's the reality. And that's what I've seen.
Okay, we have a hand up over here and then one back there.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I can say exactly what I would like to say because I'm a lot older than you. But it seems to me that what you're saying during the question period now is it's a matter of conscience. Yes, our laws reflect certain ways of thinking and certain principles and so on, but ultimately, are you not saying that it's a matter of conscience for each individual?
As far as resisting,
Whatever choice you're taking.
yeah, well, I mean, I think conscience has an important part to play. I think that when we are forced by the state to lie, as I pointed out, we have a choice to make. And that choice may be costly. And so, in that sense, yes, it's conscience.
Because it's interesting for me to listen to some of the comments that people are making and the experiences that they're having. I wasn't sure really whether it's just my own experience or whether it comes with age or not. I don't know. But I find that different people react and deal with things in different ways.
Yes.
And it's very, very different. This morning, before we came to church, there was a knock on our door, and another religious group was wanting us to have Bible studies with him. I chose not to bother because he was going to try to convince me that I should be a Sunday keeper. And I would try to convince him that he should be a Sabbath keeper. And I don't ever hear any Seventh-day Adventists saying this other than my wife, but that the very word Sabbath, if you take the S off and the TH off at the end, you have God's Father built right into the word, Abba. And I don't hear anybody being aware of that. But I think it's significant that Sabbath has God's Father's name in it. That's one thing. So we each take different positions. My oldest brother was a member of the BC legislature. He was a Liberal for West Vancouver. And so but he was not a Seventh-day Adventist, so he chose to go a certain way in life. He did some very interesting things. He went to France, and he and his wife went to a little museum in France where they have, at that time, they don't think they have it now, they have one room that was given up to the recognizing the life of a person that gave their life for God. I was named after that person. The person's name was Claude Brousson, and there's now a book written by him. And they don't have this book, the latest book, but I'm going to see that they get it. And also I want them to have a copy of Great Controversy, because the Bible and the book Great Controversy are the two books, in my understanding, that most clearly spell out the plan of salvation, because God has a plan, and he's going to follow his plan, and so on. And so it's interesting, the various speed with which things are taking place today. I've been an Adventist all my life, and I had a very dedicated mother to Adventism. And now for the things that we have been preaching for years and years and years, they're starting to happen very, very fast. So we've had the COVID issue. It's the most dramatic thing that we've had in terms of being forced on people, or a certain procedure being forced on people, and things are happening quickly in terms of climate, all these different things. You don't know who to believe. Who do you believe now? So choosing who you believe and what you believe and being loyal to your conscience, I think, is very, very important, and I support you 100% in what you're saying there.
Thank you. And, you know, it's interesting that Martin Luther referred to conscience that I have used earlier today in my sermon was the concept of conscience for Martin Luther is what is it that God requires me to do? And that which God requires me to do, I will not violate, because that's where I base my conscience. So conscience is like in the eyes of the world, in the eyes, I think, of probably even Pierre Trudeau, when he put conscience in the charter, it was like, okay, well, what do I think truth is? And for me, I go along with Luther in the sense that it's not what I think, is what does God think? And that is where I base my conscience, and which is also, that book, by the way, I recognize it.
And he gave his life. They put a price on his head,
Yeah.
and he died for his faith.
Yeah, yeah, it's powerful, powerful story.
Thank you. We have a hand in the back there.
What are your thoughts on individual rights, parents, children, in the gender identity issues?
So what time are we to leave? No.
Midnight, yep.
You know, it's fascinating that we've come at this time on human history that we would even have to have that question asked. We are now struggling with the whole concept of what it means to be a human being, with that kind of situation that we're facing right now. And it has always been understood in the history of the English common law that that the king could do a lot of things, but what the king couldn't do was go inside of the cottage and tell the parent, bar any kind of serious, abuse or something along those lines. But how a mother and father raised their kids in the fear of the Lord and all the rest were sacred. And so what we see today is when we as a society will say that parents no longer have the absolute right to know what is going on in the lives of their children, we have crossed a line that has not been at all common to our legal responsibilities as parents of our children. So in other words, the law has always recognized the rights of parents to raise their children. And it's for that reason, for example, I've always taken the stand, even though, like, for example, there was a case out of the Supreme Court a number of years ago, probably within the last 10 years, I think, thereabouts. It involved Jehovah's Witnesses whose grandchild, whose daughter left the faith, and they were babysitting the grandchild, and they were taking the grandchild to church. And the court ruled that the mother had the right to say to the grandparents, "You can't take my child to your church." That's been the common law. That's been the understanding of the rights of children, of parents, right? So the parents have the right to say, "No, this is how I'm going to raise my child." And so I respect the court on that decision. So I totally have ultimate respect for the right of parents to raise their children. And today we're seeing that attacked left, right, and center on this issue of gender identity, and all the rest of it. This is just simply totally against our experience. And I think it is something that ultimately society will take a stand on. But all I can say is I'll be like Jacob. As for me and my house, I'll serve the Lord. I mean, that's just how it is. And I think parents have every right to expect that they be respected. And I support, for example, Blaine Higgs, I think it is, over in New Brunswick, and others who said, "Look, this is crazy. This is unacceptable." He's the premier of New Brunswick. Anyhow, that's my stand on it.
Follow up?
No, I think that's good, yeah.
Good. Okay, next stand.
A follow-up question. I read an article about people in Canada, they don't pay their property tax, so their house gets auctioned off.
Yep.
And so people get it for a really good price. But then, if the owner can pay what they owe within that year, then they get their house back. So I'm thinking, what a waste of time for these people who come to the auction and try to get a house for a good price. And then I think about Take Care of Maya, because after the judge awarded that $200 million, later on, Johns Hopkins Hospital is saying, "Oh, we're gonna fight it, we're gonna appeal it," And so, like, when you talk about these court costs, like, at the end of the day, it's the conscience. We want to do the right thing. Like, we as parents, we don't want other parents to go through just this chaos that we have gone through. To have your child get a tracheostomy when he didn't need a tracheostomy, have a G tube, and then a GJ tube, then given domperidone, which can cause heart attack, and then vaccinated against his will, and then try to put him in foster care. Like, it's just, we don't want any family to to ever go through something like that. So like court costs, like say if I go to Supreme Court or even provincial court, and then I win or I lose, and then the appeal process, like how does it work exactly, going back and forth and appealing? And at the end of the day, like, I don't know, this, how does it work exactly? Because with John Hopkins and Take Care of Maya, you know how the hospital, they're not happy with the judgment, so they appeal. So does that mean that they don't have to pay the $200 million?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
How far does it go? Does it keep on going?
It keeps on going up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will make its decision. And then from there, that's how it will be decided.
Supreme Court of Canada.
Well, yeah, but you're talking about Hopkins, it'd be down at the Supreme Court US, but in Canada, it would be Supreme Court of Canada. Yeah.
So it's provincial, then
Yeah, so
Supreme, then
basically,
appeals, and
yeah,
then-
so you've got in Canada, you've got at least, well, you've got 3 court systems. You could have, yeah, it's complicated. But let me just put it in a general, okay, in the general sense, you've got provincial courts, and then you've got superior courts, which are in the province, but it's not, the judges are paid out of the federal government as opposed to the provincial government. So provincial courts are, so the Minister of Justice in the province will make recommendations to the Prime Minister as to who should be appointed on the provincial court. The provincial court is then run and operated by the province, and so then those provincial court bodies are, like I say, totally under the province. Decisions of the courts in the provincial court can be appealed to the Superior Court. And so the Superior Court judges, they're called Section 96 judges, and they are appointed by the Prime Minister's office. And so the Prime Minister will have his Department of Justice, and there's committees at the Department of Justice that look at the applicants for judges, and then they make decisions, they pass on decisions to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister decides which of the nominees are going to be put on the superior courts. Okay, so for example, I don't know what they're called here in British Columbia, but I think you would probably have like a Supreme Court of British Columbia. Okay? So the Supreme Court of British Columbia is known as a Superior Court, appointed from Ottawa, but generally of lawyers who've practiced law here in BC. Then you have a Court of Appeal. So you got Provincial Court, Superior Court or Supreme Court, and then you got the Court of Appeal, which is also a Section 96 courts. And by that I mean that the Prime Minister appoints the judges on the Court of Appeal. The Premier doesn't. It comes out of Ottawa. The only ones that the Premier deals with is the provincial courts. Okay? So it goes Provincial Court, Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, from the Court of Appeal, Ottawa, Supreme Court of Canada. That's how it goes. In a nutshell. Yeah.
Okay, final question.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful.
All
You
right.
want to have closing prayer for us?
Sure. Father, we just want to thank you so very much for being with us, that we can be in this country where yet we are still able to meet in freedom. We're able to discuss issues. We're able to debate issues. And Lord, we look around us and we see that even now, we see that there is a contraction in many ways of how our freedoms are interpreted, how they're understood. We also see, Lord, a great sense of heaviness in the hearts of many people as they look around and they see how courts are deciding issues, how governments are deciding issues, how government actors, the bureaucrats. And Lord, we just pray and ask that you give us wisdom as to know how we ought to live in what is going on. So, Lord, guide us now, I pray, that the information that we shared today and discussed today, you'll help us in our own lives not to live a lie, but instead be willing to speak the truth in love as you would have us, is our prayer. In your name, amen.